number of kids who aren't attending school at the moment has almost doubled since October last year. I was wondering whether or not the government plans to transition those kids who aren't engaged in school into government programs like this one.
So just for context, when it comes to our truancy data, absences are measured by essentially recorded as truant, essentially, if you're absent from 1 day out of 10. And obviously with the amount of winter illness that we've had, the impact of COVID-19, you can see that it's had an impact on workforce, it's had an impact in our schools. So I just say that for a bit of context. Look, when it comes to school leavers and wanting to make sure that every school leaver is either moving into training, education or employment, there is no doubt in my mind that programs like Mana and Mahi are making a difference. It means that if we have, for instance, students who have struggled to engage with the traditional forms of education, and that if some of those non-traditional options have not worked for them, employment is an opportunity to continue their training on the job. Mana and Mahi incentivises employers to provide those opportunities, and MSD is doing a great job of placing those who may be at risk of going on to a benefit or may already be on one. Minister, is there anything more you want to say on reaching young people?
I guess just as a mum on the truancy figure with sickness, I've got a 9-year-old and he had to self-isolate because we were self-isolating. Then he got it, so he missed 2 weeks last term. With the measure that you're referring to, he would be referred to, I guess, as having been truant too, and I don't think we need to transition him into any other programs. He can go back to school. But I guess just also wanting to acknowledge employers like Rod and the ones that are working closely with the Ministry for Social Development. It is really important that the Ministry for Social Development has relationships with people like Rod. They're also working with the clients on the other side, trying to make the right match up, and I think, Rod, you referred to it really well. That is what is important, is matching up the right person with the right employer, the right job, so that there's more likelihood of success for that person and for the employer as well.
That's certainly true for that.
Yeah. We've also, just as an aside, I'll add in, we're also trying to make sure that we're using every avenue to place our young people who may be seeking work or training opportunities. We've put additional funding in, for instance, to the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. We've found that in some of our more rural or isolated areas, this is where often through our mayors, we're picking up training and work opportunities within some of those more isolated communities. And so that's an example of where MSD, again, working as a team to ensure those opportunities aren't just in our city centres. Yeah.
What percentage are Māori and Pacific? I don't know whether you see that, but...
Minister, you might have there is a breakdown, I just can't remember the
I think from memory it's just under 50% Māori and Pacific, and around 63-64% are actually aged between 18 and 24. Very much targeted towards people that are likely to be disadvantaged in the labour market, particularly during an economic event like we have had, and we're certainly seeing that in the statistics that are coming through.
Certainly in my experience, it is the majority.
In
my experience, the majority are Pacific and Island Maoris that are coming through.
And look, again, I won't miss an opportunity to again acknowledge, with our unemployment statistics that came out yesterday, 3.3%. It's often the case, though, that when we have our even low unemployment numbers, we often see then a reasonable gap between the general population and then what we see in our Māori and Pacific unemployment numbers. To see yesterday those numbers for Māori and Pacific come down to 5.5 and 5.4, that is exactly what we've been driving towards as a government. We want unemployment to be low across the board, but we know that there are groups who experience greater disadvantage in the employment market, and that's who we need to be working alongside to make sure that we see those same opportunities for all our young people. Okay, Jill, feel free.
So Australia's about to announce today that it's secured a monkeypox vaccine, and the earliest that people will be vaccinated is next week for those most at risk. Why is that not a priority for New Zealand, given we do also have cases?
What we're seeing with the vaccine is that those countries where monkeypox is present, those are the ones that are then finding they are able to access the vaccine. We have been seeking vaccine, and as soon as we had, of course, cases, then that work to secure the vaccine, of course, and the likelihood of us being able to do that only increased. So we too are seeking that vaccine, but the most important thing remains the fact that we are, because it is a notifiable disease, are using isolation and contact tracing. That is successfully working for us. It has stopped community transmission. All of our cases continue to be those who have picked up monkeypox overseas.
Sexual health experts are calling for urgent government action on this, things like a dedicated monkeypox response team. Are you considering that, and is the government doing enough at the moment?
Absolutely. We absolutely are focused on ensuring that we manage monkeypox and even the small number of cases that we have with the same amount of rigour as we did with the pandemic. As soon as we saw the emergence of monkeypox, you see that we've moved to make it notifiable. That means that we have the powers to require people to isolate and do things like contact tracing. And with monkeypox and the way that it transmits, those tools are likely to be the most important tools we have. It is not as transmissible as some of the other illnesses we've recently experienced. We do have the ability to successfully contact trace and isolate. On top of that, we want a secure vaccine to support that work, and those are still going to be the most successful tools we'll have. Just as an aside, vaccine, as I understand, is mostly being used amongst those who are at risk of coming into contact with monkeypox. So the availability worldwide means that countries aren't doing widespread vaccination campaigns, rather targeted ones, and we're likely to experience the same when we do secure supply.
Just on the Commerce Commission report into building materials today, it didn't really tell us anything that we didn't already know. Was it a waste of money?
Not at all, and this is the first stage. Look, the Commerce Commission looking into these areas where we as New Zealanders sense that there is potentially competition issues in a market, them going in and looking into greater detail is supporting the work we're already doing to ensure that we have greater competition and therefore lower prices on really critical markets like building supplies. So they have identified, yes, there are areas we can improve. As a government, there's some work we already have underway, but they've also identified other measures that are likely to make a difference. So really important in our quest to bring down the cost of building supplies in New Zealand.
Is there anything that you're going to act on immediately to stop big players controlling the market?
Yeah, so they've already identified some issues that they believe might be contributing to lack of competition. And some of those are contained in their draft report. I imagine that some of them they'll already be looking themselves at whether or not they can undertake some action to ensure that those issues are dealt with immediately. Others, on things like land covenants, actually we're already taking action as part of our work on the grocery sector. But it is a draft. We look forward to getting their final report in December.
Just a question on youth crime. Is there anything more the government are going to look to do to address it? It seems to be going up. We saw some stats recently illustrating that.
Well, so generally across the board, when you look at youth offending, we've actually seen consistently over a number of years now a decline in youth court and the youth court appearances. What we are seeing, however, is some specific criminal activity, like for instance ram raids, where we have seen a spike. Now that's why we as a government have been very targeted in making sure we're dealing with those particular acts that are hugely damaging for business owners and communities. We have now within the police, they've established a specific focus on retail crime, a retail unit. We've also set up a fund to try and support preventative measures to try and protect businesses that may be targeted. And of course, there's our wider work as a government to prevent young people from engaging in criminal activity. And that's very important at a local level to make sure it's targeted towards those areas that will make the biggest difference.
Have you heard from any retailers such as Michael Hill have been hit like majority of the time?
Yeah, I am aware of some of those where they have seen repeat incidences, and I know that they're engaging directly with the police to share what it is that they're observing. As I say, that retail unit enables us to get a better sense of whether or not we're seeing repeat offenders coming through, what preventative measures will make a difference, and again, making sure that we see particular practices amongst those who are repeat offending here to try and make sure that we come down hard on that activity.
And just one, sorry, on the lending laws stuff, how do you hope this is going to help first home buyers?
Look, when it comes to the work that we've been doing as a government around consumer lending, we've had a very particular focus on that, the lending practices that often are through, for instance, loan sharks and often target really vulnerable individuals. That has been our primary focus. In practice and rolling out some of those initiatives, there has been in the rollout some unintended consequences. So what we've worked hard to do is ensure that we continue to protect those who are most vulnerable and ensure that consumers are being treated in such a way in the market that is ultimately beneficial for them, but beneficial in the long term as well.
What do you make of the National Party dropping its tax cut policy?
Look, obviously the policies of the opposition are a matter for them, and whether or not voters feel that they are consistent and therefore trustworthy, also a question for them too.
So do you agree with Auckland Transport's plan to spend $30 million on cycleway concrete barriers, which police have already said pose a danger because they're low, difficult to see and can hinder people from reversing out of their driveways?
Look, so individual decisions by Auckland Transport as to the methods that they use to encourage walking and cycling ultimately are going to be questions for Auckland Transport. I think we can all agree, though, that we do need to find the best possible ways to safely encourage greater choices for commuters, whether it's walking, whether it's cycling, whether or not it's public transport. We're working as a government to do our bit, 50% reduction in the cost of using public transport to encourage mode shift. Auckland Transport, I know, will be focused on doing theirs too. All right. I'll finish up with you.
Just quickly. The Labor Party donations email, which went out and was misleading on how many people got the cost of living payment. You're the leader of the party. Are you ultimately responsible for that?
Yeah, so look, not every piece of correspondence that comes from the Labor Party will I see. I am aware that instead of saying that there were 2.1 million New Zealanders eligible, they said there were 2.1 million who would receive it. Of course, we are aspiring that everyone who's eligible receives it, but they absolutely acknowledge the mistake. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel to stay up to date with all the latest news from the New Zealand Herald. Click the subscribe button below or check out one of the videos here and head over to nzherald.co.nz for more details on these stories and more.